Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Timmy. I'm just super tired, and the last couple days have been really hard on me. Not stock-wise, just life, but it's okay. So, here's what we're looking at today. We had the PPI come in overall cool this morning, but the year-over-year core PPI came in slightly elevated. But it's hard to say slightly elevated, because it still came in lower. However, the previous reading was at a 0.1%. This reading came in at a 0.2%, so a slight rise over last reading. However, the PPI, the non-core, came in at a negative 0.3% compared to the forecast being at 0% and the previous being at 0.6%. So overall, a cooler reading. But the core PPI being slightly elevated can lead to a little bit of a mixed result. I'm not expecting that though. I am expecting the market to basically try to buy upward today. Now, with that expectation, that really means that we need to be looking at this 755.66. So let me look at the 5-minute time frame here. Now the call and put wall will need to be adjusted. I just have those at arbitrary spots right now. Um, but when the market does open and the gamma does update, sorry if it sounds like I'm shivering, it's like 50 degrees in my room right now. I'm absolutely freezing. Um, when the gamma does update, I'll make sure to get the call wall, put wall, and the max pain all updated. Now on the 5-minute time frame here, we do have this smaller cup closed, potentially starting to build a handle from that. So we'll see where our gamma levels are at, but very likely I'm expecting this to kind of turn into a cup and handle to push towards that 755.66. However, overall, we have multiple bullish structures going here. We have the very large cup closed. We had the bearish structure at the top of that cup, which we always expect, right? And then from that bearish structure, we are now creating extremely bullish structure to start pushing upward. We have the inverse head and shoulders, potentially starting to close this inverse cup, not inverse cup, but standard cup, excuse me, which also means that I'm kind of expecting the market to push up here somewhere. We could hit all-time highs today, but I really don't think that's in the scope of the day. I could be wrong, but I really don't expect that to be in the scope of the day. What I do expect is to hit this 755, potentially pull up to the 756, maybe even the 757, build some bearish structure. From that, work on a handle, then we aim to push the all-time highs maybe tomorrow's session or even Friday. So that's the expectation today. Um, unless we see anything major shifting, then that's kind of what I'm going to be expecting. So if we get a nice pull downward, that doesn't invalidate this smaller cup, and also with that smaller cup, we do see basically a cup and handle forming, so a small handle should be expected from that. If we don't see this cup being invalidated, um, then we should be pretty much set to that 755.66. Now, if we do see an invalidation of that cup, we do have to be a little concerned because this can start to create a bit of a head and shoulders. So we'll see what's happening today. Good morning, Vietnam. I always forget the name of that movie, but I remember what movie it is. It's where they're playing that radio station in Vietnam. It's been a while since I've seen it. So, a couple other things we got going on is that the dollar has been starting to steadily pull downward. Okay, it was starting to pull back upward pretty heavily. Um, Now this is the daily time frame, so this is basically showing since the beginning of May right here, where it started to really pick up. It has been pulling downward again though, and overall that is a fairly bullish indicator. Dollar pulling downward means there's more dollars in the system. More dollars in the system usually reflects bullish stocks. Now, I have to watch ACN pretty close today. I do have some options expiring on Friday, so ideally I want to get some cleared out today, potentially some cleared out tomorrow. So I will be checking in on ACN pretty heavily, as this is a very large position in both my portfolios. Now, IBM and IBX, I do have 100 shares of IBM. The average on those are 219. I bought some at 220, bought some at 218, and I'm going to hold these for long term. However, the IBX, I have 200 shares at that 16. Okay, so I am expecting quite a bit of upside on this over the next, couple weeks, month, 2 months. Semis are doing very well today. I have a bunch of drawings on it though, which I don't remember what I drew, so just give me a second. Okay, so that was targeting support. Let's go ahead. Yeah, targeting support. Targeting resistance, which we have not hit yet, so I do fully expect that to be hit. Again, we do have this smaller cup building here, expecting a handle to push upward. Oh, my room is so cold right now, but I really don't want to turn on the heater. Okay, market opens in 4 minutes. Well, 4 minutes and 10 seconds. Oil has been again on the rise. Obviously, the conflict has been started back up. I'm not a warmonger, but I do hope they finish the job this time. PayPal's up 17%. You know what, Mike, let's go ahead and try to find a play like that today. So, give me just a second because I want to set up my phone to where I can watch that while quickly digging through some symbols. Now, you're all going to join me today on this journey of finding a new quality trade, okay? And there is a very specific way I do this. So I set the daily time frame and I start going through looking for either upper Bollinger moves or lower Bollinger moves. Okay. It might look kind of flashy on your screen, so I do apologize. Um, this is a fairly quick process that I look for. That would have been good. But I'll show you what I'm talking about when we find something. Now we are going to go through over 700 symbols. I don't think I'll be able to complete it by the time. This isn't ready today, but this will be ready very likely tomorrow. Okay, so I'm going to write this down. BNO. Now that is oil, so we don't want to be heavily shorting it, but the trade is opening. Webull, I almost took calls at the very bottom of that, but I believe I had something come up that day. This is not ready today, but it will be ready very likely tomorrow. We're going to look at CF in a little bit, so I'm going to circle that. As you can see, day 2 overextension within the upper Bollinger. Now we're going to check the weekly. The weekly shows that we are slightly above the 20 MA, which means that this still has some room to the upside. Okay, so this can still be a really good trade to short into, but we're not going to target that just because we want to see the weekly and the daily give us the same confirmation. Now, I really don't want to short CrowdStrike, but this has been something I've been wanting to target for a while now. However, they're not aligning enough just yet, but we're going to write it down to check back tomorrow. Now the market should be open in 3, 2, 1. So let's go back to the SPY for a little bit. Okay, let's check the 5-minute time frame. Now we're going to give the gamma about 5 minutes to fully update. We do have that handle closing and pushing upward, so that's very nice. Now, we're not going to target short positions when we get to the upper Bollinger here. Again, we are fully expecting this 755.66 to be hit today. So anywhere between this range, we're not going to target shorts into. Okay. So I'm actually going to make a note of that. No shorting here. Okay. Oops. Webull crashed. See, I was looking at PayPal the other day too. So, hold on. Interesting, they're having a move downward, but overall pushing up. I was looking at PayPal down in this range. It was written down on my trades I wanted to take, but I just didn't because I saw this head and shoulders. So, of course, that would have turned out really nice. Let's go back to the SPY here. Okay, let me go ahead and check the max pain and ACN today. is doing pretty good. So give me 1 second because I do want to get a limit order out on one of my calls currently. So ACN closed a really nice cup here, but again, I'm not going to be risking it too much today. I want to make sure, you know, with an absolute that I secure a little bit of profit here because we have been seeing a little bit of faltering out of ACN, which is what they say, no bueno. Um, so let me make sure I get this adjusted. Okay, so I got that set up. Okay, let me go ahead and check the gamma. One moment. Okay, got my ACN call filled. Very happy with that. I still have some 140s that I'll be running. Okay, so our call wall is at the 757 today. So let me adjust this 1 second. And our put wall, that's way too low. That'll get adjusted. It's at the 745. So that'll definitely be adjusted because that is far too low for the put wall. Now I want to check our max pain. Max pain is at 751. So I want to make this orange, dotted, 5100. And let's put the note of max pain. Now again, I am expecting the put wall to move upward. That is extremely low on the day. So what I'm expecting, and this call wall kind of really tells the story here, is that again, remember we talked about how we expect the market to push upward. We expect it to start building some bearish structure up here, and then we expect it to pull downward to form a handle. This call wall is kind of telling us exactly that. Now, can we push above it into all-time highs? Absolutely. We've seen, that type of movement before. However, what I'm really assuming today is that we get a move kind of pushing slightly underneath or even slightly above, creating that short position to form a larger handle. Okay, so that's what my expectations for today are. And seeing how hard we're pushing right now. Let's see, the high of the day was 755.23. We should strike that 755.66 pretty much in no time here. So we will be looking for this range above that. to open some puts. Okay, ACN is doing good now that I sold my call. So I have multiple ACN calls going, multiple different strikes. The call that I did sell was the 130. Now, I'm super proud of that 130, okay, because I bought it at the 118. This did pull down to the 116.75, but I bought it very slightly after that. So I took that call from 118 all the way up to basically 137. It was up to the 142 at one point, which that call was up, I think like 600, 700%. It was up a ton, okay? Um, but then we had a major pull down, which was really unfortunate. We had kind of two doom sessions, and one of them was this session where we pulled down, it says the 131, um, but I know it's the 120 something, 119. So it was this session right here where basically we're all the way up at that 132, and then it just dumped down to like 119, which really killed a lot of the profit on that call. Pulled back up to the 140, dropped down to the 130, well 129, which once again kind of really gutted some of the opportunity of that. Pulled up to the 142, which I really should have taken profit at that point, but I was expecting this to turn into a cup and handle to the upside. And then we had the IBM news come out, which of course I get caught in one of the largest sell-offs of, over 40 years. Um, the IBM news absolutely cratered ACN. Um, took us down to that 124 something. So at this point, that 130 call that was expiring this week, I just want to cut it off, even if we do have more upside potential. Now, I do have some 140 calls this week, but the other big call that I have going is a 115 or 150 call for September. Okay, so that's the one I'm really expecting to hit a lot of upside on. I'm really targeting this basically 150 to 158 range for that contract. So should get that. Um, Not today, obviously, but over the next few months. Now, we did hit the 755.58, so only 8 cents off of that level that we are really expecting. I do expect us to push well above that. I don't really think that this is going to be that perfect short here to start heading downward. I do expect us to get very close to that call wall today. Yeah, they really nuked those calls yesterday, unfortunately. Um, which is just a huge shame, honestly. But I think potentially your calls could still do some good here. Because again, we do have this cup closed, and now we're starting to form that handle. We previously pushed to the 142.50 range, which means that we can start to target that range again. Have that cup shown there, so. But we do have this inverse head and shoulders. We do have the cup closed. We do have this larger cup closed, which means that this is now technically a cup and handle. with a nested cup creating an additional handle. So can we push up towards 142, 145, maybe even 150 over the next two sessions? I think it's definitely reasonable. Um, it's just a little shaky at this point. The IBM sell-off really did put a damper in what we were expecting here because we were seeing all the bullish structure, and then that sell-off ended up really nuking those positions. Now let's take a look at a few things here. So the VVIX volatility is a little elevated this morning, which is surprising. However, it did open at the 93.76. The high was at the 94.17. So I am expecting this to start dropping back down a little bit as we, push back up towards those highs again. The HIG is closing this cup towards the 79.82. So even though it's currently at the 79.79, it did have a low of 79.71, but I am expecting it to close at 79.82, and this should coincide very greatly with what we're expecting on the SPY, which is to kind of push above that range and head towards that call wall. So I'm waiting on positions right now. I'm not going to be entering shorts or anything until we start building bearish structure up in this range. Where to exit the SPY 755 put. Now, what I would personally do is I would try to exit that put around that 753. Currently, the middle Bollinger is at the 753.80. For me, that would mean I would try to exit that put around that 753.90. Okay, just to really secure that level. Again, we do have a smaller cup built here, so if we're going to pull down, then are we going to pull down all the way to that range? I'm not so sure right now. Okay, I think it's very likely, but there's the potential that we don't, because pulling down to this range, it gets us very, very close to invalidating that smaller cup. And I don't think the market is trying to do that right now. I think the market's trying to build liquidity to the upside. So I would target that 753.90 range, somewhere in there. Give me 1 second, I want to take a drink of water. Don't beat yourself up too much over that, Mike. Again, I mean, there is no way we knew that IBM crash was coming, and that especially that the IBM crash would affect ACN the way that it did. We had no way of knowing that. Great, great. I think that's a good exit. Potentially could head downward more, but with today, I think it's very safe to target that range. So what I want to see here is, do we invalidate this smaller cup and start building some bearish structure? Or do we see a bounce at this range towards the upside? Now to fully invalidate the bull structure here, we have two different levels we need to look at. But we do have this 753.63. May not be to the penny there. Slightly below that, so I'm assuming the 753 61 range. But we'll just do the 753.60. Okay. And then if we invalidate that, we have to look towards the bottom of the cup, which is at that 752.23. So we do have a small invalidation of this smaller cup. But again, we do expect bearish structure. Sorry for all the squares on the screen, but just trying to highlight a point here. But we do expect bearish structure at the top of a cup, and we do have this cup built right here. This is some of that bearish structure, even though it is invalidating the smaller little cup there. Now, I don't think this is going to turn into a head and shoulders, but we will have to watch and see. What I'm going to be trying to target today is calls to the upside. So if we get any form of reprieve, if we get a bounce back up to the 20 mil, then I will be trying to target some calls to that 755.66. It says 63, but the level's really 66. And, trying to push above that slightly. Volatility is at the 94.21, so even though I am expecting bullishness out of the day, that is a little elevated. So we do have to be cautious of that. However, the HIG is still buying upward, which is a very good signal. We are having semis dumping right now, which they haven't fully invalidated this cup yet. But if they do get to the 560.42, we'll call it that, then that's something we have to be cautious of. So we'll be watching for that level. Now I am going to check the gamma again, just to see if we have any updates with the put wall, any updates with, our other levels. Yeah, so the put wall's at the 752, which is, far much more what I expected out of today. It opened at the 754, which did not seem right. Okay, so from a dealer standpoint, that's telling us that we very likely shouldn't be pushing down too far here. If they're going to push us downward, then we should get fairly close to that range, but we do have a major support there. So unless the market is trying to really sell off below the put wall, or towards that max pain, then, so far I'm not going to be really looking for that type of selling just yet. I am expecting them to start building some support fairly soon here, and then heading upward. Volatility still at the daily high, which is 94.24. So I am waiting for some form of reprieve here, and I just want to go ahead and delete some of these lines off the chart so I don't go crazy. And I also want to look at the SPY calls. Because I do want to target the 755 strike. So at this point, I'm waiting for a couple different things to occur. I'm waiting for semis to start bouncing upward, which I do believe the conditions are fairly close to seeing that happening. Um, However, we do have the potential of this turning into an inverse cup. So I do want to see some major buying out of semis to really solidify that we're going to be taking these calls to the upside. And I do want to see the VVIX pulling downward. The HIG is looking great though. It's at 79.81. Just need to see volatility pulling down with semis buying up. But I will be targeting those 755 calls. Now we are having tech selling a little bit. So I want to look at QQQ here. Excuse me. So we do have this support at the 718.67. We got down to 718.93 so far. $726.45. So we basically close this cup. We're off by 13 cents. But this is pretty indicative of creating that handle. So I am expecting a bounce fairly soon, but I'm not taking calls until I really see the signals that we want to see. Kind of the same as semiconductors here. If I miss my entry, then I miss my entry. Not going to worry about it too much. Because ideally the position I really want out of today, even though I am pretty bullish, is I do want the put position. Okay, and the put position would mean that we would have pushed up towards that, 755, 756, potentially even the 757, and from there, targeting the downside. So that's kind of the big position that I want today. Volatility still rising a little bit, so it did hit the 94.48, currently at the 94.43. And I want to double check on our ACN. This is looking good to build a cup. So we should be seeing the push to the 140 today on ACN. Volatility still climbing, so 94.53. Again, this can start creating that head and shoulders to push to the downside if they really want to push that downside. We do have the lower Bollinger starting to curve upward above the bottom of the cup, which again, we have that cup formed right in there. So if we head down all the way to the lower Bollinger, as long as we don't invalidate that cup, then I am going to look for calls into that. So that would be a really nice call opportunity if we can get down to that range. Now, volatility is kind of bouncing all over the place, so it was all the way at the 94.48, dropped to the 94.20, now it's back up to the 94.36. So a little bit of mixed signals going on there. However, our HIG is continuing to buy upward. It did hit the 79.83. which is a very bullish signal so far, even with all this selling going on. Semis did not hit the bottom of that range, so as long as we see continued buying from here, then this still remains bullish structure. So currently just waiting. Good morning, Tommel. Alright, can you check Walmart? Yeah, let's check Walmart. That is because you have some bearish structure going on here. So a couple different things on the daily time frame here for Walmart. You do have this double top, which we will just mark this in red as the overlying primary bearish structure. But with that, I was a little too enthusiastic with that. We do have a larger head and shoulders being formed here. So potentially Walmart's going to try to aim for another leg downward. And I don't think that's, excuse me, I don't think that's too unreasonable at this point to assume. I would be kind of looking for this 98 range as a very strong support. You did have a prior support range at the 109.87. However, you see that they tested that level, almost tested it there as well, but they tested that level, pushed underneath it a little bit because they needed further liquidity, pulling back upward. Now, if we see the struggle once again at that 20 MA, if we see it reject, then this support should break down. Okay, so I am going to be looking towards that 98, 91 range. Can't stop yawning today, geez. So, with the SPY, we see our ADL pulling back up basically to the high of the day. So that is a bullish signal. This should close this cup back up to the 755.66. Volatility is starting to pull down, but it's still fairly elevated. It's still at the 94.13. The HIG is at the 79.82. So remember it was at the 79.83. I do expect that to kind of move upward a little bit. Semis have been starting to buy upward. Same with QQQ. So a lot of different bullish signals occurring, but we do need to see the volatility, really dropping. Yes, SOXS did have a split. Also, Drip did as well. Well, reverse split, excuse me. I believe they were both 10-to-1 splits or reverse splits, if I remember correctly. So we did miss the call opportunity at the bottom of this 20 MA. We did talk about that. That was potentially a really strong call opportunity, but we were seeing some mixed signals and because of that, we did not enter. Completely okay with that. Volatility is at the 93, 95, so finally broke that 94 range. I still want to see continued buying out of semis though. Yeah, wait for puts. Again, we really want to target this range in here. I know this might look like a pretty large range, but I think we're going to see it narrow a lot once we start actually pushing above the 755.66. Can't stop yawning today, jeez. HIG still looking strong, so 79.82. As long as that's holding strong, then we're good to go. Or as I say, that it pulls down a penny, which does matter a lot. The HIG moves kind of slow, so every single penny really matters. Apple is just on a tear today, which has sort of nuked one of the puts that I have going on it. But that's still for the end of July, so I'm not too worried. So again, I really do want to see the semis buying upward here. Continued selling would be pretty bearish because it would close that inverse cup. Volatility is back up above the 94, so it's at the 94.13 currently. And so far we have failed to secure the high of the day, which would close a smaller cup there. Okay, so even though it looks a little janky, this can be that head and shoulders. So just exercising a lot of patience here. Okay, pushed above that 755 again. Still waiting for semis to really start buying upward. We are seeing tech buying back upward. It did pull down into that 718 range. Currently back up almost to the 722. Well, it is back up to the 722. So we should be hitting the daily high again and really closing that cup soon. Which from this smaller cup, let me go ahead and just delete this bearish structure right now. Assuming we do pull back upward, close that cup, I'm expecting a small rejection prior to pushing towards this call wall, because again, I do kind of expect that handle to occur. Sorry, I had to mute a second. My wife brought me coffee. Now I'm warm again. It's been so cold at my office this morning. Okay, so what am I targeting? Um, Currently I'm not in calls, okay, even though there was the opportunity. I was still a little hesitant down here just because we were not seeing the volatility pulling downward at that point. It was actually moving upward. Um, until we started to pull all the way up here, that's when volatility really started to pull down. So we're not in calls just yet, even though I am kind of bullish on the day. So what I'm looking for here is not even the top of this cup closing. I'm not going to be shorting the top of that, even though we always talk about we short the top of cups. Um, I'm wanting this smaller cup to create a handle, okay? I don't expect the handle to pull down towards the 20 mo, but if it does, that's going to be a really good signal to take a call at that point. So that's what I'm going to be looking for kind of our first position, okay, is to see if we do pull down to the 20 mo again for that handle. And from that handle, that should give us a pretty decent run. That should give us roughly from that 754, what was that, 754, 60-ish range, all the way up to the 756, 757. Okay, so that's kind of the first initial position that I'm looking for. Second position will be when we do determine the bearish structure here, whether it's above the call wall, below the call wall. Whenever we really identify that bearish structure, we will be taking shorts into the day, very likely targeting that lower Bollinger, which will probably be around that 753.90 range, 754.20 range. No, I didn't try to make a 420 joke. Just came out naturally. Semiconductors, we do need to see buying though, because this can turn into bearish structure fairly easily. Okay. From that 562.24, if we close down again towards that, which is kind of looking likely at this point, that does create a small inverse cup. From that inverse cup, we'd expect a small handle pushing down towards that 560. So this needs to turn bullish, or else our SPY thesis is going to have to change a little bit. Volatility at the 94 again. It did pull back up towards that 94. Says 94.16, but I only saw the 94.12. So maybe I just missed it. But we do want to be seeing our volatility pulling downward. The HIG has been buying upward still, which is, extremely bullish. So as long as the HIG continues buying to the upside, and as long as we close our cup here, which again we do need to hit that 755.58, I'm just using that box to show that range we need to close, then, sorry, my daughter's making sound, lost my train of thought for a second. We do need to close this cup here if things are going to be bullish. Volatility at the 94.10. Semis did pull down to the 562.69. Low of the day was the 562.24. So if we can reject this smaller inverse cup closing, that would be bullish. But again, we do need to see some major buying out of semis. We need to see some major buying out of tech. Tech did drop quite heavily today. It did drop from the high of the 724.35 all the way down to the 718. Now we did not hit that bottom resistance or that bottom support. Bottom support being at the 718.73. So I actually just want to mark that out. Looks close, but so far we have not hit that level. And overall we do have this very large bullish cup going on. So if we see tech buying upward, if we see semis buying upward, then that will be a very bullish signal. But we need to see both of those buying upward. If we don't have those buying upward, then the SPY will not close this cup here. And then we'll have to look for additional structure. This still can be a slanted head and shoulders, but it really doesn't look like that to me. It really looks like it's trying to close this cup. Volatility is at the 94.12. I want to look at ACN here for a moment. Yeah, we should be good for our 140 today as long as the rest of the market doesn't end up selling off. Yeah, I would wait for puts, and you could take the 754s. I think those would be very reasonable. But that's kind of the big trade that I'm looking for today, is creating bearish structure at the top of this range, above that major cup at the 755.66, and from there having a pretty strong short position to the downside. Volatility is at 94.09, so kind of just holding that same range. It was a little higher, but I am expecting volatility to drop. Right as I say that, it goes down to 93.98. But I want to see it dropping basically to the 91 or even 88 range to really signify that the day is going to be pretty bullish. Now, semis did pull down towards the bottom of that very large inverse cup. Now, it has not invalidated the overall larger cup here, but it did invalidate this cup right here. Okay. Which isn't what we wanted to see. Again, we did want to see a bounce at that level. Okay, if we're going to be fully expecting the bullish upside. Now, from here, we are at a very key support. So last time we hit this range, we had a major bounce to the upside. We'll see if that kind of continues, or if we start breaking down even further. I don't really expect us to break down too much further, but we will just kind of have to wait and see. Volatility is back up at the 94.15. And QQQ is at the 720.50. So we do want to be seeing QQQ pushing all the way back up towards that 726.32. Okay, that's going to be very important for, the overall day. Now potentially starting to build some bearish structure here on QQQ. Not fully there yet, but getting very close to closing this large inverse cup. It's at the 68, so I want to make sure to mark that. Okay, so SPY starting to pull back up towards that 755.58. Sorry if you guys can hear my daughter. She's grumpy this morning. Anyway, volatility pulling upward though, as this is trying to push that level, which is not what we want to see. So it is at the 94.35. We really need to see volatility be broken today. The HIG, however, is still extremely strong right now. ACN should be pulling back up to that 138.50. Let's see, could you check NVIDIA? And I would just get 0 DTs here, Mike, when we do take our positions. We don't want to be taking 1 DTs in this market environment. That's just really asking to get positions completely blown apart. Now, if you are going to trade it as a 0 DTE, you can get the 1 DT just to have the position move a little slower. But just make sure if you do get that 1 DT, you're not trying to like hold that position overnight. We don't want to be doing that in this market. Unfortunately, until we get a president who doesn't tweet, you know, major decisions, we cannot be taking 1 DTs to hold overnight. So let's check NVIDIA. Let's see what's going on. I want to go to the daily time frame for a moment. Actually, I want to go to the weekly time frame for a moment. So we are breaking out of that consolidation range a little bit here. Well, technically within the trading session, we are within that consolidation range. Did have that inverse cup close there. However, we do have a very large bullish cup here. And this cup has been created all the way back in December. We do have the bearish structure at the top of that cup, which is something we fully anticipate. And we've been seeing buying very close to the upper Bollinger. So upper Bollinger on the daily time frame is at the 214.80, which means that if we're going to see bullishness that I'm expecting out of the market today, we should be seeing NVIDIA closing above the 215. Now let's check the lower time frames, see what's going on. This is very great structure. Okay, this is very good structure. Now I know this candle is a little misleading here, so we're just going to kind of ignore it. Just pretend it doesn't exist. I wish that blocked that out, but of course it's not going to. Because we do have this inverse head and shoulders, which is overall a very bullish structure. However, into this structure, And this inverse head and shoulders is also a cup that has formed. Okay. But with this structure being created, we do have a little bit of a head and shoulders being formed here. Now, we can say that this is invalidated. However, it kind of works both ways here because with this smaller head and shoulders, we do have this smaller cup. However, they've invalidated that this morning, so we're kind of in between structures here, but the overall structure is that we do have this cup formed. Okay, from that cup, we expect bearish structure, so we are expecting a little bit of a pull down, but from that pull down, we should start heading back upward. Okay, now I think this candle to the 221.11 is pretty indicative of where NVIDIA wants to head. Doesn't mean exactly that it'll head to that range today or, over the next few days, but usually they don't have major candles like this unless they're going to make use of them later. So overall, I do think that NVIDIA is bullish. Give me 1 second, I want to mark some levels and then I want to go down to the 5-minute time frame here. So 5-minute time frame, you do have this smaller inverse cup closing. From that, potentially having a smaller handle to the downside. However, the lower Bollinger is a really, really, really good call entry. So I do think that there's the potential that we pull down, push below that lower Bollinger on the 5-minute time frame, and then it creates a call opportunity potentially all the way up to the 213.81. And the range that we would need to close above for the day to really be overall bullish would be the 215. So that's kind of the level that you're looking for out of today. Even though it might seem unreasonable, I don't think it's unreasonable at all. Now let's go back to semis because semis have been absolutely melting. Now the next level that is a support here is the 547.54. Okay, from that range, that can create a bounce to the upside, but that's also quite a bit of room to the downside still. So we'll see if they take that. We did pull up towards the, hold on, 755.56, so 3 cents below the prior range, which I don't really count in this situation. However, if we push down to the 753.21, which is looking super likely, then that would invalidate some of the bullish structure that we do have. Okay. Now, volatility is up at the 94.73, so it is extremely, extremely elevated right now. And QQQ has broken that support that we talked about, which means that we now need to target the next support, which is exactly at that 714.34. So I'm very, very okay with just being patient today until we see something open up. We were expecting a small pull down here, but not as much as it did. Yeah, basically 17 cents off the low, which if we close the low of the day, that invalidates our bullish structure, creates bearish structure, which really changes the thesis up a little bit. Good morning. Yeah, if we do get the higher low, then that will be bullish. Okay, if this holds. But we really need this to hold, and this is a very, very uncompelling case against that. Um, this looks super bearish at this point. This is, semiconductors right now. So we had to be really cautious of this. Because, for example, if we try to target some calls in this range, even though that's kind of exactly what we've been looking for, and overall I do think that this could be bullish, but we could end up taking calls in this range and the market just ends up pulling down on us, which that is the opposite of what I want, okay? Um, because again, with semiconductors, we do essentially have almost a full $8 downside still, if they actually aim to take it. Now, they could be trying to build some support at this prior support range and then bouncing off of that. Still a little too soon to say. ACN doing good. That's what I want to see. So while I do think that it's very compelling to take calls, and that they absolutely could print extremely hard here, I just see many, many, many mixed signals, and because of that, I am very hesitant to take calls from that. Volatility is still very elevated. Now it did move up to the 94.79. It's currently at the 94.31. So pulled up and then pulled back down, but it's still very elevated. The HIG is still at the 79.82, which that is very bullish. Yeah, I definitely think there's room to scalp these ranges. Um, it's just not something I want to do because I'm managing multiple portfolios at the same time. So any position I take, I have to, do that through two different portfolios. And with these moves being very, very quick in here, it makes it very difficult. I need something a little more solidified for me to really enter. Okay, so I sold one of the 140 calls on ACN, so I'm down to a single 140 call left, just in case we do get our push to the 140 plus. And then I have the 150 call for September 18th going. So I'm happy with that. Not fully happy with how that position went, because we were all the way up at that 142, and then they decided to dump it down to 119 the next session. So that kind of really destroyed a lot of profit I had going on that. Exited NVIDIA at the 209.70. Were you in puts? I think you were in some form of put spread if I remember correctly. Let's see. Could you check NVIDIA, please? I have the 212. Okay, great. Great. That should have been a super, super good position for you then. It is actually so cold in my office. So we are continuing to push downward on semis. Okay. Remember the next support range is at the 547.54. We pulled down to the 550.60. So extremely, extremely, extremely close to that range. Okay, this is very, very dangerous to look at if we're expecting, that bullish upside. QQQ did break the 718.68, so we're going to go ahead and delete that support range for now. Next support is at the 714.34. So we will see if that gets hit or not. There's a lot of money to be made with these scalps today. It's just I'm not going to do that on multiple portfolios. It's just way, way, way too difficult to manage. Now, on a really range-bound day, here's a little secret of how you can trade this really, really successfully. You go to the 1 minute time frame, which I usually don't like the 1 minute time frame a whole lot. However, it does give you very, very quality entries and exits. So this is showing the put right there. The call up to the upper Bollinger. Upper Bollinger back down to the lower Bollinger with the put. And now we should be expecting back up to the upper Bollinger. You could usually do this with the 1 minute time frame pretty successfully. Won't always occur in this fashion, but this is a really, really easy way to kind of mindlessly do scalps. They just have a lot less confirmation compared to using the 5 minute time frame, the 15 minute time frame, things like that. But it's still a really solid way to trade. Definitely a way that could probably benefit some of you. And that's one thing I always try to look for too is confirmation through the 1 minute time frame. Because usually if we're pushing one of the Bollingers, that usually means we're pushing a fairly key level on the 5 minute time frame, whether it is one of the Bollingers itself or the 20 MA. So use it to your advantage. HIG's still sitting at the 79.82, which overall is bullish, even though we might be seeing semiconductors and tech selling off a little bit. That is overall bullish, with the HIG being or holding its range at that 79.80 plus. Volatility still a little sticky today at the 94.38. I really want to see this pulled downward if we're going to be seeing the bullishness that I'm expecting. Nope, we're not in puts yet. So for today, we are really expecting to push upward. Okay, as close to this call wall as possible or even above it. Okay, if we could get above that call wall, that would be really, really, really a prime entry on those puts. I don't expect us to push the all-time high today. If we do, that'd be, great, but I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting the market to sit in between this call wall and put wall, which I'm actually going to check the gamma again here to see if it's tightened up any. So still the same. We still have the call wall at the 757 and the put wall at the 752. So nothing's changed with that just yet. Semis are still pushing downward, which is telling us that extremely likely we push down to the 747.54. Now, because semiconductors don't have 0 DTs, which I really don't know why they don't. I think it's pretty ridiculous. It makes it a little harder to check the gamma levels because you have to check the gamma levels for the weeklies instead. So when semis move, roughly $15 to $30 a day, um, whatever the gamma is telling us for Friday really holds almost zero bearings for what's going on with today's session. Now QQQ getting ready to push down to the support as well, it looks like, the 714.34. Volatility is elevated again, so it's at the 94.77. So just a lot of mixed signals. As was stated in the chat, it looks very range bound today. Now I do think that that can change because the range on the day is actually fairly large. Okay, again from the dealer perspective, they want to be in this area. Okay, now could they just want to trade in between here? They could, but from the dealer perspective again, ideally you want to sell high IV calls and you want to sell high IV puts. Okay, you don't really do that just by sitting in between the call wall and put wall without really getting close to those levels or even pushing slightly above or below. So I am really expecting one of these ranges to get pushed today. If we push down to the put wall, that's going to give us conviction to take some calls to the upside, because very likely they're not going to try to close below that put wall. They're very likely going to try to push upward from that. And same with the call wall. If we get above the call wall today, that's going to be a really good entry on puts because it's a very unlikely that they're going to try to close above that range. So we do have a very large range today, but I'm not set on them keeping between the 750 and the 730 or the 753. Okay, I do expect them to either push downward very close to that put wall or below it, or start really trying to aim to the upside. Now, with everything else, and there's our support being hit. What is our level at exactly? Because I want to see how close to hit it. So the range was the 547.53. The low of the day was the 547.54. Now they could still be pushing for a lower low today, but 1 penny off of that support so far might be very indicative of them trying to keep that level. So we'll see if they hold that level. QQQ has been buying upward so far, but we still have to be very cautious of that 714.35 because that is a major support range. Now, of course, ACN is starting to buy upward after I sold a lot of my calls, which that's just the way the market works sometimes. I still have a call though, so I'm still a little bit of a happy camper, but could have been a lot better. So we are looking for this 141.54. I'm going to go ahead and delete this selling channel because I don't like it. And I want to see SPY here. SPY is getting ready to break a new low of the day, it looks like. Very, very close. It's only 6 cents off of the prior low. So we should see that hit. Yep, there it is. So my expectation at this point, based off of what we're seeing on semis, what we're seeing off of QQQ, we should be pulling down towards the put wall or below it. Okay. Actually, I just want to make this a white arrow so it's a little easier to see. But I am looking for one of these ranges, either very close to it or below, for us to take calls into. Because overall, this is still a very large bullish structure. Okay. And we were expecting a little bit of a pull down from this handle. Of course, it's pulling down a lot further than anticipated, but that's okay. So that's what I'm going to be looking for to take calls to the upside. I'm not going to be targeting just into this lower Bollinger just yet, even though potentially that can give us a bounce to the upside. I do see the overall bearish structure being playing, or wanting to play out on this 5-minute time frame. QQQ, push below that support. Same with semis, push below that support. Now, if they're going to continue to try to sell from the support range, the next one would be at that 532, which I don't think they'll try to take that one. I do think that one's a little far off. But the market is crazy, so we'll see. Volatility is at 94, 93. And I actually want to use this range very, very soon here to sell my SQQQ call. Because I do think that we're going to be trying to target all-time highs. Not today, but probably over the next few sessions. Even with some of this bearish price action going on. Volatility is at the 94.95. Yeah, this is definitely a dead cat bounce right now. I would not be taking calls into this. I think it's super, super, super likely that they try to close all the way to the 752.20. Okay, because that would close that inverse cup, which aligns very well with kind of our thesis on when we want to target some calls today. Because at the bottom of an inverse cup, we always expect bullish structure. Kind of the same way how with the bullish cup we are expecting the bearish structure at the top. Same thing applies to this inverse cup as well, just obviously in the inverse fashion. So we should be getting our target below this put wall to take some calls. Volatility is at the 95.05. The HIG is still holding up pretty well though. Okay, it's at the 79.80, which, that is most definitely holding up very strong. This is not majorly indicative of a huge sell-off occurring. Usually we'd be seeing this drop, to the lower 79.70s, 79.60 range if we were going to be seeing major selling. Semis potentially starting to build some support on that prior support as well, which is a good signal. Now again, I am not taking calls at this range, even though I think there is a thesis to do so. It's just not what I'm looking for just yet. Volatility did pull to the 95. It's currently at the 94.94. Yeah, good job, Johnny. QQQ also building a little bit of support off that range, which again, that supports at the 714.34. Now, if they are aiming for a major sell-off today, they will pull down to the 709.88. But again, I really don't anticipate that out of the day. You know, that'd be a whole nother $6 to the downside, which I'm not really seeing right now. Sorry, I had to mute for a second. My daughter ran in here. Yeah, I mean, it's like today is a little misleading because it's like we do have a lot of selling going on. However, our corporate um, high yield bonds are just sitting at the high of the day, you know, pretty much. Yes, they were at the 79.84. Okay, yes, that's 2 cents above where we're at right now. However, this is still holding really strong. Um, this is not indicative of massive market selling. And the reason why that's not indicative of massive market selling is, you know, the HIG is not just some random ETF tracking some sort of bonds. Okay. This is pretty much like the highest echelon of equity risk you can take, meaning the spreads between your profit is going to be super, super, super small. So every single penny here really matters. Um, every single buy, every single sell here has some weight to it. Okay, because the spreads between the high yield corporate bonds and the overall treasury bonds are very, very, very thin. So people that are trying to profit off of high yield corporate bonds are going to be extremely, extremely precise with their levels. So if there's going to be market selling overall, that's going to degrade the value of your corporate bonds, which means that you'd be selling off HIG positions if there's truly going to be a equity sell. So it's one of those dealer type positions where dealers heavily position themselves into HIG. They heavily position themselves into the VVIX, whether it's taking a long position or a short position. Um, it's one of those dealer instruments. So I put a lot of weight into what's going on with the HIG, even if our market might look, you know, absolutely disgusting right now. But because the HIG's holding strong, I do expect the market to overall buy today. I think that's reasonable. Um, I think that's actually a pretty reasonable idea. Now, we talked about how I don't usually like 1DT positions. However, taking a position for Friday, I think's super reasonable, especially if we do get below this put wall. Um, because the Hig is telling us the market overall should turn bullish, okay? At least with the current signals. And that means that it's very, very likely we try to push to the all-time highs. Not today. I'm not expecting that today. But I am expecting that probably over the next two sessions. So would that 755 do probably very, very well? I think absolutely. I think there's potential that we could be pushing all the way to that 762. Now the reason why I say the 762, let's turn off the drawings here, is that the daily upper Bollinger is at the 759.31. If we're going to be pushing that level within, today, tomorrow, or Friday, we're going to be trying to close above that range. Okay, so that means that 760 target is super strong. Okay, um, I think that's super reasonable. In fact, I might even join you on that position. So we'll see. But I do want to see some additional signals. I do want to be seeing the volatility pulling back once we get down to that put wall. Okay, I do want to see volatility pulling back because it is very, very elevated right now. And again, we really do want this below the 92 to really signify that sellers aren't taking control. Because if we pull above that, if we continue pushing upward with the volatility and push up to the 98, then that's really showing that, sellers are the ones that are in control, which would kind of dismantle our thesis of seeing that, upper Bollinger. Now, one thing I want to check though is where the daily or where the 5-day moving average is at. Now, the 5-day moving average is at the 752.11, which means that we should be seeing the 754 for the upper bounds of that range and the 750. Okay, almost to the penny. So, does that kind of coincide with what we're seeing on the SPY today? A little bit. Now, I wouldn't expect the push all the way to 750. We have already tested the 5-day moving average for two different sessions now. I don't really think the market necessarily needs to push for that level again. Um, but hitting below that put wall would still qualify as testing the lower bounds a little bit. So we'll see how this ends up playing out. But so far, our signals are looking fairly strong. We have the Hig still at the 79.83. Semis are pulling back down again. So potentially we get another push towards that support or even below that. Same with QQQ here. But ideally I want to see a push below this put wall. That would give me a lot of conviction to take calls. So I shall be patient. Hold on, my daughter wants to say bye to me really quick. Alright, I'm back. So we are seeing volatility pull down a little bit. It was very close to that 95. It's currently at the 94.51. HIG is still sitting, super, super strong. Semi is still looking fairly weak, but again, this can turn into an upward bounce fairly easily at this point. Kind of the same with QQQ here. And technically they have not invalidated this smaller cup. So while this would be a very extreme handle, potentially that could turn into a buying range. I just don't like it right now. I do think that we are going to try to push towards that push wall. We just want to be very patient on our positions right now. Yes, there's room to scalp in between, but that's not what I'm looking to do. With how low semis are right now, with how low QQQ is right now, I do think that these bounces to the upside could end up being, kind of those dead cat bounces. I really do think that the market is trying to aim for that support at the 752.20. So I'm going to be patient as possible to try to get down to that range or below. HIG's still buying upward. It's at the 79.83. So if we can get our downside move here, that'd be really, really great to enter calls into. But I do want to be patient for that level. We're seeing semis starting to pull back down again. They were at that 7, or not 7, but 554. Now they're back to the 550. I actually think there's a pretty good case too, um, if we do end up pushing down to that level, to take some SOX-S puts. So taking a SOX-S put would be essentially like taking a semiconductor call. I haven't checked the prices on the options on these just yet, but I do think that's going to be a really nice position. Actually, I want to watch list a couple of those. So, SOX S, I want to look at the 46 puts for 2 days out. No, they don't have the new options yet. Well, never mind about that idea. He just did its reverse split, so it's going to take a few days to populate those options. Unfortunately for us. But I do want to watch list the 755 calls for Friday. Sorry, just 1 second, checking some things. Hold on, so 2-day TTE. So I want to watch list the 755 calls for Friday. So if we get our push down to the 752, then I will engage on that. They're actually not bad priced either. Would 756 be okay for Friday? It would, but remember when we do pull down, the price of that 755 is going to drop, pretty significantly. So I don't know how much you have working with, but um, we might be able to get that for 160, maybe 170. I'm not going to take it unless we push down towards that put wall or below. if it drops to 162, yeah, I would watch list the 755 and 756 just in case. Because like this move from the 753 to the 754 has pushed that contract from the 200 to the 230. So could dropping below that 752 bring it to the 164? I think there's a potential for that. Anyway, I'm gonna mute for just a minute and go make some more coffee. So I'll write a note and I'll kind of write the thesis of what we're looking for here as well. So just in case the market dumps like it always likes to do when I'm AFK, we'll all have the same plan. Okay, so I'll be right back in a few minutes, everybody. But that's the thesis, that's what we're looking for right now. So yeah, I'll be right back. Let me drag that to where it's not getting cut off by the price. There we go. Okay, so I'll be right back in just a couple minutes, everybody. Alright, I am back everybody. Sorry about that. So we did drop to the 5220, which I want to delete this box so that we can see, and delete this arrow. But remember we talked about creating this very large inverse cup? I don't think we're done with it yet. I do think that we're going to push down a little further and start to build some structure in there. Sorry, I ran upstairs. Anyway, here's the call that we're looking at today. The 755s for Friday. Now, we did hit the 167. I currently have my buy order set to literally the price that you're looking for, the 164, because I do think that's going to hit. And I think those are going to be really, really, really quality options. So I think you'll be able to snag one of those 155 or those 755 calls. More of a challenging day again, but I'm again very, very comfortable with being very patient, waiting for our positions to hit. In fact, we might get our calls even cheaper. They're currently at 176, so I'm going to move my limit order down. Let's put two different limit orders. I'll put one for the 164, and then I'll put another for the 152. Because if I liked it at 164, then I'll definitely like it at 152. So that's the plan for that. Now, someone mentioned to me that they're wanting to add on to the USO puts. I would not suggest that just yet. Now, I'm currently still holding mine, very comfortable holding those, but I'm not going to add to them yet until we start to see this conflict slow down a little bit. Okay. Now, there's a lot that can go wrong with this conflict, and give me 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. So the thing about this conflict, and it's something I didn't think about, is that, well, I did think about it, but we had our ceasefire. Stepping back, we had our ceasefire, which ended, I believe, on Sunday or something. I don't remember. It's been a long week. Um, but we had the ceasefire end. Okay, maybe it was last week. I don't even remember at this point. But the thing is that the IRGC, the Iranian Guard, is comprised of many different subgroups. Okay, and while the overall IRGC right now is, kind of enacting hostilities towards us again, is that it takes any one of those subgroups to completely, dismantle a ceasefire agreement. Okay, all it takes is, a smaller commander attacking a ship going through the strait to completely dismantle that deal. Um, so there's a lot of conflict in terms of either we need to get rid of the IRGC or they all need to be on the same playing field and all on the same team and agreeing to the same things. So next time we get a ceasefire, I'll be looking to add to those USO puts, but I'm going to be very cautious with how I add them. okay? Because this conflict at this point could last, you know, potentially years. And I don't think it's going to last that long, but if we don't really put our foot down and really start dismantling their military, um, this conflict could last years. So we have to be, you know, wholly prepared for that. I don't think it will, but it's something we have to be cautious of. Where would we enter a 0 DTE on SPY? If we get our target below this put wall, which again, that's really what I'm looking for here, then that's where I'm going to enter also some 0 DT calls as well as some of those dated calls. But I really do like the price on these dated 755 calls, and I think the strike and everything is very, very, very reasonable. Now the HIG is at 79.80, so pulling down a little bit. Right as they say that, moves up to 79.81. Our ADL has been picking back up. Now I want to look at semis. So semis did close this smaller inverse cup, which is very likely indicative of wanting to push further downward after building some liquidity. Same thing with QQQ. So I'm still expecting for us to get down to that range. If I ended up missing my entry because I was making coffee, then it is what it is. But one thing with this structure as well is that we have completed this very large cup. From completing that cup, we can be building a handle to the downside. Now again, I do think that we're going to push down prior to building that handle. But maybe this was the liquidity they needed to start working on that handle. So still our game plan's the same here. So I use Webull to do all the charting. I used to use TradingView, but I personally just really like Webull's charting system a lot better. I think it's a lot less convoluted. And the walls, are you talking the call wall and put wall? So every beginning of the trading day, we check the gamma levels and we see where the call wall is located, where the put wall is located, where the max pain is located, and I mark all of that out so that we are very, very, clear on what the dealers are expecting out of the day. Now, if semis push to the 553.21, that would be fairly bullish. That would invalidate this smaller inverse cup. Same for QQQ if it pushes to the 716, basically 72. So we'll be watching for those levels to see if it tries to invalidate some of this bearish structure. And for SPY, that level would be the 754.16. Now, volatility is still very elevated right now. It was all the way up to the 95.03 with a high of 95.18. Pulled down towards that 94, let's say 25. Pulled back up to the 95.05. Currently back down to the 94.70, but still very elevated. So I am expecting this to pull back down. But we'll see if we get invalidation of some of these smaller bearish structures. Right? I know, we hit the 167. Now I'm gonna mark this level on QQQ. I think it's at the 72, so let's just mark that. And we'll see if we hit that range or reject it. Okay, if we hit that range, that creates a bullish cup. Also creates a double bottom. So if that does occur, then that is fairly bullish. Because again, we are looking for bullish structure at the bottom of this overall bearish structure. So potentially that could be the bullish structure. I do think we'll end up selling down a little further, but we will have to see. The market likes to spite us sometimes. So this always happens when I go get coffee though. Market ends up selling off and then I miss my level. Now let me look at the 1 minute time frame. Could be a really wonky head and shoulders forming. So we'll see if we get continuation within that. Same thing on QQQ. I do think we'll get our level though. I really do think that we'll get our downside. I mean, technically we did. We were looking for that 752.20. It hit that, perfectly. I'll be disappointed if we don't. I'll just say that much. The ADL is looking really strong though. Volatility slowly ticking downward, which is supporting bullishness right now. So tech is faltering a little bit, but we need to see it drop a lot further. Tech is starting to buy up a little, which again, we're looking for that 716.72 if they're going to work to invalidate our structure. Potentially trying to build some bullish structure here though. This is on the 1 minute time frame. Volatility still holding that 94.60 range. Now, one thing that is working towards the favor of our downside is that the 5 minute 20 MA is currently at the 753.84. The level we need to push to invalidate the bullish structure is at the 754.18. So we could test that 20 MA, reject it, and head downward. Basically just waiting for QQQ to start rejecting to really give us that signal that we'll be heading downward. The ADL was fairly strong, it's still fairly strong, but we are starting to see it taper on the buying side a little bit. Doesn't mean we're done with the buying, but that tapering can be a little bit of a signal that we might be slowing down a little bit. volatility is at the 94.44, so it has been ticking downward. Last time we talked about it, it was at the 94, I believe 63. Now semis are starting to pull down again, which should definitely lean on the SPY a little bit. So if we see this rejection out of QQQ that I'm expecting, then we should pull down to that range that we're looking for, which would basically be that higher 751, low 752. QQQ starting to sell, so if we see continuation of that, we should get our level. Again, I do have a buy order set to the 164 and also to the 152 on that SPY call. If we do pull below the put wall, then I will add some 0 DTEs. I think we're going to get our downside target, and I think it's going to pay off really well for us. And again, the calls that we are targeting are the Friday 7:55 calls. Okay, so we are looking for that 164, and then ideally if I can get one at 152, that'd be pretty cool. Now the HIG is still strong. It's actually at the high of the day. It's at 90, or excuse me, 79.84. However, we are seeing bearishness out of semiconductors. It's very likely we close that small cup, or excuse me, the small inverse cup to the 546.06, which on QQQ we did not close the upward cup, which means that we should be able to target the low of the day being that 713.58, which all should coincide with giving us our level at that put wall or slightly below. Ideally, this is kind of the range that I'm really wanting to target to take 0DT calls, but also for our calls for Friday, that'd be a very, very quality entry. Because even with all this selling going on, the HIG is telling us a different story. The HIG is telling us that the market wants to be bullish. So with the market wanting to be bullish, all of this is very likely, stupid Weeble would let me draw sometimes. All of this is very likely just liquidity, okay? Just, farming cheap calls, knocking people out of their puts, trying to sell high IV puts to people. Again, that's kind of what happens when we get towards these walls, is that from a dealer standpoint, you want to target the put wall or the call wall to sell, covered calls or covered puts, okay? Because that's how you get the high IV out of it. Then you end up burning the position by pulling it in between. Should see continuation of this bearish structure. Should give us that low of the day. Kind of expecting that out of QQQ and SPY as well. So our calls should be getting bought here pretty soon, and I'm talking the ones that we have set for the 165 or 164. Current price is at 171, so if we push our level down again, we're going to secure a couple of those. I should hear a ding any second now. Fortunately, you all won't hear the ding, but I will, and that means that the position filled. So, looking for that. We just need like another 10 cents down. There we go. There's one of them. Now, with this inverse cup, excuse me, let me step back. We have the larger inverse cup closed. We do have the handle starting to form, which is telling us, almost verbatim that we're going to be pushing towards that 752, higher 751. Now the max pain is at 751. I don't anticipate us really trading at that level. The dealers might try to aim for that, but I think they would lose a lot of money if they do. So very likely going to try to target underneath this put wall. That's not out of reach at all. That's literally only basically 60 cents away, 70 cents away. And that should give us some really nice 0DT positions. And those positions that I would take would probably be the 753 calls. I'll have to check the price on them, but They'll probably be fairly cheap at that point. Yeah, I'm assuming they'll probably be around 65, $67, give or take. But that's the trade that I'm going to be making on the 0DT today. And then I am slowly accumulating some of those 755 calls for Friday. Have one of them, but ideally want to add another one or two if we can push down to our level, which I think is more than reasonable at this point. Yeah, I'll type it out. It's the 755 call for, what's today? That'd be for the 717. Do we call you cup or handle? Um, my name's Dave. You can call me Dave. That's just the name of my firm, so. It's my favorite structure to trade within, so I figured that's a good name of my firm. And nobody else had it, so. So Mike, with that Friday call, we might get a pull down a little further, but don't stress about it. Um, this is exactly kind of what we're wanting. Okay, so don't worry if you see your call pull down a couple dollars, we're gonna be good to go very likely. Now, I do expect QQQ and semis to be pushing this level, basically the low of the day, which would definitely carry the SPY into that same level as well. So I think they're just really trying to shake out positions as much as possible. But we are seeing volatility pick up, which means that dealers are hedging positions. If dealers are hedging positions, then we should be truly expecting some of that downside. The HIG is holding super strong though, still at that 79.83. So hopefully we can get our level below this put wall. Um, because again, they're really going to try to, milk positions here. They want to sell very, very high IV puts. And how do you do that? You create bearish structure, you make the day look very bearish, you pull down to that put wall, which boosts the IV very, very significantly because a lot of people don't know how to trade within their technicals and they'll just be blindly buying puts into this thinking that, oh, well, we're having a market dump, we need to chase that. Um, but from the dealer standpoint, I think that this put wall is going to become a major, major support where we start buying upward from. So for QQQ, that needs to be the 713.58, and for semis, it's the 546.06. So I think both those levels are very well within range right now. And then, we're only 24 cents away from the low of the day. So should we push below this put wall? I think it's super, super likely. So we should get our really quality call entry here. Especially with volatility ticking up back to the 95.12. Volatility is almost at the high of the day, so now the HIG did pull down for a moment to the 79.79, but it's back up to the 79.81 again. So they must have seen a influx of sell orders or something like that to cause that type of reaction. Volatility dropped slightly, so it's at the 95.04, but still not super indicative of, upside buying just yet. I also think that the 5-day moving average, if I remember correctly, is either at the 751 or 753. 752.09. Okay. In between both those ranges. So with the daily or with the 5-day moving average being at that 752.09, let me just mark this out. Looks ugly for a moment, but I apologize. But that creates a range where the market should try to buy above that if we're going to see the market wanting to continue buying upward. Okay. This is basically our nearest support in terms of the daily moving averages. So with this being the nearest support, this becomes a very, very strong support to bounce off of, which means that we can pull below it slightly. But I do think that the overall thesis of the day is going to be basically push down to that level, then buy upward. There's our low of the day again. So I am expecting kind of a nice push downward here towards this higher 751 range. So looking at the SPY calls for today, I want to put a limit order on the 753s at that $55 range. And something just filled. He was that second SPY call for the for Friday. So perfect. Got my call for 152 and the first one for 164. So I'm very happy with those. We're going to move our limit order down a little bit on these 0 DTEs. So I want to move it down to 51 because I do think that level is going to hit. Now, another cool thing about this is that this becomes a really quality buy range for multiple different reasons. And this kind of goes back into last night's class that we discussed with market confluence, but we look for mean reversions below the lower Bollinger on the 5-minute time frame. We also have our put wall there. We have the 5-day moving average there. We have a lot of different signals that are telling us that we should start bouncing to the upside. So I feel very good about these positions right now. I went ahead and took two of the, was it 753 calls for today. I got those at $51 per. And I have two of the 755 calls for Friday, and my average on those are 158. So I'm very happy with both of those positions right now. Let me take a look at IBM. But I am starting to expect buying at this point. Okay, from multiple different perspectives, I'm expecting volatilities to start dropping down. I'm expecting us to start buying above this put wall. Okay, because dealers have been able to sell a ton of puts at this range. Now it's time to potentially start targeting this call wall. Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves, I want to look at the gamma again, just to see if the call wall is shifted. It has not, it's still at that 757. So we should be good to go. Okay. So IBM. I think the next target would be this 212.34. But there is also this 207.77. 207.77. All right, and I was able to sell some puts on SQQQ, or sell some calls, I mean. So I do think that's definitely within reason. However, getting rid of all the drawings for a moment, with this massive sell downward, this has created a lower Bollinger push. Now, with a lower Bollinger push, we kind of expect, two different things to occur. One is that on the second day of the lower Bollinger push on the daily time frame, we do expect a lower low compared to that first day. So where would that lower low take us to? Well, probably that 212.34. Could it take us to that 207.77? Potentially. But I would expect the 212.34. So on the day 2 lower Bollinger on the daily time frame, we do expect a lower low, and from that lower low, we do expect upward consolidation. Now, where's that upward consolidation going to go? It's going to first target that daily or that 5-day moving average. Now, the 5-day moving averages is going to start pulling down very heavily against this. Okay, over the next few trading sessions, Because remember, it only takes 5 trading sessions for the 5-day moving average to pull down to wherever the market is. Okay, so if we stay at this, lower, let's just call it 212, 215 range, then within the next 3 to 4 sessions, we will see the daily 5 or the 5-day moving average there. Okay, but that's one of the first things we look for is lower low of the day 2 and then upward consolidation from there. So can we hit the 207? Potentially. Can we hit the 209? Potentially. But I do think the 212 is far more reasonable. Now I want to look at semis for a moment because I do think that we're starting to push down towards this next support range. No, we're not. We still have $10 before we hit that range. I'm not expecting the push down to the 532 today. Currently semiconductors are down 25, almost $26. And if you remember, usually semis try to trade about that $30 range in the day. So we're kind of getting to that range. Okay. Now with SPY, again, we have a lot of reasons to start buying upward. We have the lower Bollinger coming in on the 5-minute time frame, very likely on the 15-minute time frame, probably 30-minute time frame. So multiple different time frames were within the lower Bollinger, which creates a really strong buying area. Okay, we have the put wall at the 752, which from a dealer standpoint, we should want to buy above that range. Our HIG has pulled down a little bit, so it's at 79.79, but that's not really indicative of selling just yet. 79.80, right as I said that. Volatility was at the 95.34. It was just literally a second ago at the 95.25, and it pulled down to the 95.04. So I do think that we could start seeing buying fairly soon here. I would take profit. Again, between semis, QQQ, and the SPY, we have a lot of reasons to start pulling back upward. Okay. I would not try to extend further for that position, even though I think there's a good case to do so. I would just be super, super, super cautious about it. So what I'm looking for now is I'm looking for volatility to continue pulling downward. That's probably the first signal that I'm looking for because that's telling you that dealers are starting to close those positions. And if they're closing those volatility positions, then they're no longer looking at equities as a risk. They are more so looking at equities as a reward at that point. So I am looking for volatility to push down. Again, I would like to see it below the 93 range today. Now we do have a support here at the, was it 751.26, which means that potentially that becomes a target that we need to acknowledge. So we'll see if they aim for that range. Now I want to look at QQQ here for a second. So that next support would be at the 709.50 or 59, excuse me. So we can go ahead and delete that support. Go ahead and delete that. So can QQQ pull down another $3? I think absolutely. But I'm not really expecting it at this point. It's kind of the same thing for semiconductors. Can semis pull down to that 532? Well, absolutely, but it's not something that I'm anticipating at this point. Previous support, we can go ahead and delete. We did get the selling structure we anticipated. Now, I do want to look at the 1 minute time frame here, just to see what's going on. So this can pull back down, create a smaller inverse cup again, and push back into the lower Bollinger, which pushing in the lower Bollinger would tag that support range that we talked about just a few seconds ago, that 751.26. And no, I'm not closing any of my calls or anything just yet. The HIG is still at 79.79, which usually if you're going to be seeing a super large sell-off, you'd be seeing the HIG dropping pretty significantly. It hasn't done that yet. Volatility has spiked back up though, a little bit. So it's at the 95.38. We did hit that support range, so we'll see if we try to build support at that range or if we aim to push down all the way to the 750.07. Volatility is at the 95.79, so major tick upward. Potentially we might sell down to the 750, but I'm not going to be cutting my calls here. HIG still holding strong at the 79.79. We have semis and tech pushing for new lows of the day. Now that we are below the max pain, I am going to add a single additional one of the Friday calls, just to bring my average down a little bit. Now for the 753s that I have 0 DT, I'm not worried about that at all, because if we do start seeing buying to the upside, uh, like we're expecting, then the IV on those calls will, jump up pretty massively. I'm not really worried about the theta right now. At least not yet. About an hour and a half from now, then I'll start worrying about theta if we're not really moving towards that 753 by that point. Volatility is at 9601, so very, very elevated. The HIG is at 79.78, so a little selling in the HIG. But so far we're starting to see some buying out of tech, we're starting to see some buying out of semis. Not a whole lot yet, but a little bit. Now, I did not see the time, so I do need to get going in a little bit, even though I'm still going to be trading. I'm just going to be trading on my phone compared to my computer. But if anybody has any questions about any symbols or anything, now is a really good time to ask so that we can go over it. GDXW, okay. Great question. So overall, the thing that we have to think about with gold is that there's two different factors leaning against it. And this is kind of why over the last few weeks I've been taking gold positions towards those lower Bollingers, and selling them towards that 20 ma. But with that said, we have two factors that heavily weigh against gold. Okay, we have the treasury yields, and we have what the outlook of the interest rates are going to be. Now, those sound like the same thing, and they do kind of revolve around the same functions. However, one thing that we have to think about is that we have two different kind of weights bearing against us. We have the oil conflict, which elevated oil prices do cause short-term inflation. Okay, it's called transitory inflation. It's very short term. Now that short term could be a couple of weeks, it could be a couple months, but it's a very short term inflation. Okay, this is very common for any sort of oil conflict. Even though this is one of the more extreme ones we've seen in probably the last 15, 20 years. It does cause short-term inflation. Now, what short-term inflation does is it does scare the Fed, okay, because the Fed has to be very, very on top of what's going on with inflation. If inflation is going to continue rising, that pushes the Fed into a stance of, okay, we need to hike the interest rates, okay, to defeat that inflation. However, we're starting to see inflation actually come down. We saw that with the report yesterday. We saw that with the PPI today. We're seeing that through the dollar. Okay, the dollar is one of the largest indicators of inflation, okay? Because if the prices or if the interest rates are going to be going up, then the dollar is going to be rising very heavily. The last time we saw inflation really in the system, the dollar was up at that 110. I believe it was up at that 120 at one point. 114. But this is basically when the inflation from COVID hit. We went all the way from that 95 up to the 114.78. Now, with this conflict starting, we went from this 95.55 up towards the 101, almost 102. We've been seeing the dollar starting to drop. It's currently at 171. May not seem like a very large drop, but that's, you know, billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. Okay, so that holds a ton of weight. Now, with inflation overall coming down, and again, we see that through the CPI, we see that through how the treasuries have been acting. We've been seeing the treasury yields overall slowly pulling downward, which let's go to the 10-year. So the 10-year was all the way up at the 4.622%. Okay, it is currently down to the 4.549%. Okay, that's very, very significant. But it still has ways to go. When the oil conflict really was at the highs, we were all the way up at the 4.663%. Before the conflict, we were at the 3.949%. So we still have some work to go on our 10-year yield, but this is starting to pull down, which is indicative of, you know, not needing interest rate hikes, which is very good for gold. Okay, that's very good for gold. But with the oil conflict going on, it can pull this back up again. Okay. So with that said, it's hard to look at gold and be bullish right now. I think that buying into these lower Bollingers is a really, really solid idea. And the reason why we're looking at the GC main compared to GDXW is that this is basically the actual gold price. This is the futures pricing of that. So I try to buy into the lower Bollinger on the daily time frame. Each time we get to that lower Bollinger, I add a few shares of GDXW, and it does very well. I also try to add on the low of each week. Now, it's kind of hard to tell, but today will probably be one of those days that I add into this, where I usually only add a few shares. I will take the weekly dividend and then sell it on the, try to time the high of the week during that next week, so that I make a few dollars between the spread. I also make the dividend, because again, this is a weekly dividend. So that's what I try to do with GDXW, and that has allowed me to start making a lot of money off of it. It's not exactly the most easy thing to do, but it does work. And in fact, I think today's going to be one of those days that I add into GDXW. So I'm going to take a few shares at this 34. Let's see if we can get 34.23 in here. Cool, got the 34.23. Now back to the SPY. The HIG is still sitting at the 79.78. We have QQQ pushing fairly close to this 109.59. We have semis only, $5 away. excuse me, $7 away. I'm being stupid. $7 away from this next support range. So potentially we can sell down into that. For SPY, we have this next support range at the 750.07. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this support range and that support range. Now, I also want to check the gamma here to see if there has been any shift within the gamma. Because if there is, then we want to know about it. Okay, so the call wall and put wall is both at that 752, which kind of shifts things quite a bit. It means we're either going to get a very adverse push below and close below that level, or we're going to push, very high above that level. But I think based on what I'm seeing today, I do think that they're trying to sell a lot of high IV puts here. That's what I really do think they're trying to do. We've been seeing the HIG holding pretty strong through all of this. Volatility did pull up to the 96.04, currently at the 95.95, so hasn't pulled down greatly yet. But with this call and put wall being at that 752, this is telling us that, essentially we've been selling puts the entire morning. Okay. Now, do dealers want to exercise all these puts? I don't think so. Okay, I really don't think so. Um, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. Doesn't mean they won't. If the price is going to stay, down, if we're seeing actual selling, then dealers will absolutely exercise all those puts if necessary. But from the dealer's standpoint, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to do so. Okay, because this essentially loses them a lot of money. What the dealers ideally want to do is they want to sell a ton of puts in this range where the IV is just off the charts. And then they want to pull it above that range to basically nuke the positions that people bought into here in terms of the put positions. They want to drop that IV off and very likely pull it above that call wall. Now, another thing we have to think about is the 5-day moving average is also right at that call and put wall. So if we're going to reclaim that level, okay, which again, we talked about this, even though I said I didn't fully expect it, that always seems to happen. But we talked about how with the 5-day moving average being at that 752, that creates the upper bounds and lower bounds of the 5-day moving average. Well, the lower bounds was essentially right at this 750, and the upper bounds is at that 754. Okay, so currently we've been doing a lot of testing of the lower bounds. We did a little bit of testing of the upper bounds this morning, but mostly just selling down into that range. But from that, ideally dealers are going to start trying to target this upside. So that's kind of what my expectations are at this point. Even though this selling seems pretty aggressive, it's really not as aggressive as I've seen real selling be. Our volatility, yes, it's pulled upward, but it's starting to trickle downward. The HIG holding very strong. So I think we're seeing a lot of good signals that we could be buying upward. Having a bounce off that lower Bollinger on the 1 minute time frame hitting the 20 mil, having a little bit of a rejection from that range, but I do expect it to kind of be claimed and for the upper Bollinger to be retested at this point. Because it has been a while since the upper Bollinger has been tested. Last time it was tested was basically over an hour ago. Um, so for the lower or for the 1 minute time frame, this is kind of telling us that we should be getting an upward push pretty soon here. So I'm not shaking out of any positions yet or anything. I think that the calls are very likely going to pay out pretty well today. I would just like to see the volatility start dropping a lot further, and I would like to start seeing the HIG buying back upward to really signify that, yes, we're just selling high V puts and we're going to push back upward. I stream Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Usually I don't stream Wednesdays, but I didn't stream on Tuesday this week, so if I don't stream 1 day of the week, then I will try to pick it up on that Wednesday. So that's what today is. Today's the makeup stream for yesterday. Now, inflows and outflows, there's multiple different ways you can assess that, but one of the best ways to do so is with the ADL. Okay, and I haven't been able to find this indicator on a lot of different brokerages and things. I've found it on Webull, and I believe TradingView has it as well. But it's the um, accumulation distribution line. Yeah, accumulation distribution line. But basically, what that means is it's monitoring the money inflow and outflow. Okay, so if we're having major outflows, then this is going to track that. Which so far it's showing a little bit of outflow here. But even compared to this morning, you see how we bought up, bought up, bought up, all the way to that 3.43 mil, and now we've dropped down to the 2.8. But it's still not the low of the day. It's not like we're seeing an actual negative within our outflows here, which is for me a good signal. Okay, this is a good signal for me that we could start seeing buying again. But we do need to be seeing this within semiconductors and tech as well. So semis, you can see how this is just a pure negative outflow, which obviously today semis have just been getting absolutely trashed. Kind of the same with QQQ. We did have some negative outflows going in, but then in this range we saw a lot of accumulation occurring. So that's actually a pretty positive signal. Now we are starting to see a little negative starting to hit again. But we did accumulate quite a bit up in this range, which is telling me that this is a very important level. If I can drag the box correctly, this is a very important level. Okay, and that's kind of the same thing that we're seeing within SPY here. That right here is a very important level. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't just continue selling off for the rest of the day. We absolutely can. This is the stock market. It can do whatever it wants. But overall, this is a good signal to me. This is saying that there was a lot of accumulation going on in this range. That wouldn't usually be done just for no reason. And usually this isn't retail that's affecting the ADL. Usually this is, the big money that's doing so. So I think that's a good signal. Whenever we can find the bottom of wherever this selling is going. Now, we do again have this support range at the 750.07. Based off of how we've been selling, I do think that it's very, very, very reasonable we do hit that range. But overall, I'm still not seeing the major sell signals that I would expect to see. On major selling days, we've seen the VVIX go all the way from like 88 all the way to the 101, 102 range. Okay. Yes, it's gone from the 93.72 all the way to the 96.04. But even then, that's that cautionary range, right? That's that yellow range, and this yellow range holds a lot of weight. Now, with the caution range, we can still be selling in that range, but we can also start buying in that range. I have so many arrows and stuff on here from prior trading sessions. It's driving me crazy. But so far, we're not seeing the VVIX push, you know, well into that major selling range. Again, we've seen some of these, and you can see on the daily candle, we've seen some of these days where we've gone from the 90 all the way up to the 103, gone from the 94 all the way up to the 108, um, all the way from the 90 to the 102. So, are we really seeing major selling here? I'm not so sure. It doesn't feel like it right, just yet. Now the HIG is dropping a little bit. It is at the 79.76. Kind of the same thing here. Usually on the major selling days, you see major selling. We've seen the HIG go from the 97.74 all the way to the, or excuse me, not 97, 79.74 all the way to the 79.46. On these very large selling days, we usually see very large reactions out of the HIG. Um, we're not really seeing that just yet. So I'm not super convinced that we're having a major selling day. Um, I think that potentially a lot of this weight can be bought up pretty easily. Yeah, I would hold the Friday call, but not the one for tomorrow. Sorry, I had to mute for a second. Anyway, um, so does anyone else have any questions before we go ahead and end the stream for today? I will be streaming tomorrow and I will be streaming Friday. But so far, I am holding my calls unless I see a major increase in the VIX, or the VVIX. That's the volatility that I track. I don't, track the overall VIX itself because that's more of a retail tool than a dealer tool. And I don't mean that in like a demeaning way either. It's just the actual VIX itself moves based off of the SPAX options. Um, which can be heavily influenced by actual retail traders. A lot of retail traders aren't going to be, taking VVIX positions to, basically take insurance against their equities like a dealer would. Um, which is why I look at the VVIX for that volatility confirmation. The 0DT call I'm holding still. Might seem crazy at this point, but I do think that today's one of those type of days where we could get one of those really adverse reactions to the upside. If that doesn't change within the next basically hour and 20 minutes, and very specific about that, has to change within the next hour and 20 minutes roughly. Um, if we don't see anything shift in that time, then that's when I'll go ahead and take the loss on these 0DT calls. Okay. But I think there's a lot of accumulation going on right now. I think that this is exactly what dealers want to do. Because if I was a dealer, this is exactly what I'd want. I'd want to be just nailing people, selling high V puts, and then right when everyone thinks that, oh my gosh, it's about to dump even further, you pull it up, nuke all those puts, and then, you're good to go. We do have the call and put wall at that 752, which means that we either will be pulling heavily below that range or heavily above. So I'm leaning more towards very likely I think we're going to start pulling above that range. I can be wrong, you know. I've been wrong before, but so far that's what I'm seeing from at least the dealer perspective. Especially now that we've hit plenty of our supports. Um, and then on top of this, remember, this cup did close, okay? With this cup closing, what do we expect? We expect a handle. This could be purely liquidity, okay? And it would be hard for a lot of people to see that, but I think that this could be purely liquidity. And that liquidity would be targeting that upside. And I really don't mean that to sound dismissive when I say that people can't see that. Um, a lot of people aren't looking for those type of signals, you know. Um, a lot of people are looking for exactly where the direction of the market's going. Well, that's great, and I don't want to try to predict the market, but I also want to think about what the dealers are thinking about. And the dealers, they don't want to be exercising all these puts, you know. Ideally, they don't. Even if that means we only close right above that call and put wall. Um, they want to nuke a lot of these puts that they sold into the market. Extremely likely. But with that said, I'm holding all my calls right now. I do fully anticipate the upside. We've been seeing our volatility still trickling downward. It did hit a high of 96.04, currently at the 95.51. Starting to see semiconductors buying upward a little bit. Starting to see tech buying upward a little bit. Very close to that support range. We have a major accumulation above those ranges on tech, on SPY, and kind of on semis as well. It looks a little different because it's purely on the downtrend. However, there is a lot of accumulation in that area, okay, which is telling me that very likely dealers are going to try to target that range. Well, what happens if dealers target that range? It starts to build bullish structure. What happens when you get bullish structure? Generally, even more bullish structure. So, I think it's entirely plausible and reasonable to have those expectations at this point. Close at the 753 today. I think they're actually going to push above that And the reason why I think they're going to push above that is because the 5-day moving average is at that 751.78, which means that we should at least be pushing above that 753.80 range, which kind of pulls us into that 754. Which would be right in this accumulation range that we talked about earlier. That'd be right towards this area in that accumulation range. Well, what's right there? We actually have a major resistance. And so with that major resistance, usually resistances will turn into supports. Okay, so that's kind of a very quality range that I'm looking to target at this point. But I do think we can potentially pull back up all the way to the 755 today. I don't think that's out of the cards at all. Again, once dealers start closing their volatility positions, this is just going to absolutely start flying. Okay. So we'll see. We'll see. But with that said, I will be putting out a video tonight going over, kind of the recap of the day and my expectations for the next day. I'm starting to make those videos, every single trading session every week now. So usually they're about 12 minutes long. I'm trying to get them down to about 5 minutes, but I kind of am just not the best talker, so I'm working on it. But with that said, everybody, I hope you all have a great day. I hope our calls do very well. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, great rest of their trading session. And I will talk to you in my video tonight or tomorrow. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you when I see you.